Meet Sneha Manohar, the Indian girl who rose above her circumstances and made it to Wharton.
What's your backstory, Sneha? And what was life growing up as a kid in India, UAE, and then in Canada?
A very big question to start with. When we think back to our lives and what sort of those defining moments are, the more and more I age, the more I realize how those early years in your life really shape a person, right? And that's certainly been the case for me. My backstory really began in Delhi when I was around 4 years old. I come from a small working class family. We were just about getting by. And back in those days, this is the 80s in North India. Education was one thing, but family wealth and all that was a totally different thing. But even that modest family life sort of changed overnight for us. At the age of 4, unfortunately, I lost my father to a heart attack overnight. It was not something we expected at all. But very quickly, a family that was just getting by, we really struggled to make ends meet. And so a lot of my life and a lot of ways in which I've approached my decision making to life has been guided, by something that happened very early on, because those earliest memories for me are memories of seeing the trauma that my mom was facing, memories of seeing how friends and family would feel that sense of sorrow and pity for the fact that here's a 30-year-old widow with a 4-year daughter, myself, and my younger brother who was only 4 months at the time that this happened. So when you layer this financial difficulty with the fact that we're in a sort of a conservative context, and the fact that the prospects don't look very green either, as a young impressionable person, what I took away from that time was that I really had to find a way to support my mom. Those were the first resolutions and determination that I think back to. It was that I should never need anything from anybody, and not only that, I should be able to be the source of support for my small family at the time. So that was a really big, guiding force for me, because your earliest memories really shape you and they define you. My backstory also, it's as much about the difficult circumstances that we were in as it is about the people that enabled us to get out of those circumstances. So having lost my father, my mom moved to Dubai in search of a better job, supported by the extended family. We moved from Dubai then to Abu Dhabi in search of a slightly better job, and so on and so forth. And those travels then took us from India to the UAE to Canada, which is where I did my high school studies. But once again, this is a very unusual set of circumstances, because throughout that time of growing up, if you looked at my sort of resume on paper, you think, she studied a global citizen, she's lived in all these different places. But when you start to peel, the reasons that drove that, you very quickly realize that actually it was necessity that took us out of India to Dubai, from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, from Abu Dhabi to Toronto. So my backstory is a story of how you're given a set of circumstances, but through chance, through good mentors, through opportunities, it's really about breaking through those circumstances and being able to not only support myself, but also be able to give back to the family. And that's really been the guiding ambition. And then that guides all your decision making from that point on.
Wow. So you must have been like this really sensitive, all-absorbing kid, right? I can understand that you wanted to support your mom, your family, but you perhaps took it to another level by being a brilliant student, going to Wharton. How did that happen? Tell us more. And how did that help build your perspective in life?
There's 2 ways these kinds of impacts can shape you as a kid. It can make you incredibly sensitive to people's situation and very empathetic towards suffering. And I certainly think that if I want to be known for something when I die, I want to be known as somebody who is able to alleviate the suffering of other people and just demonstrate that empathy and give an opportunity for people who are in circumstances similar to mine to be able to come out of that. So that's certainly one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it, I think also, is you grow up very fast. My memories I have of my childhood are not of the, sort of kid playing around or the fun little things. It was always about excel in academics, because I really thought of academics as my ticket to a better life for all of us, I think we talk about circumstances always in a negative context, but I also think that part of the positive circumstance for me was I was good at school. I spent every waking minute of my time wanting to be the top, 1, 2, or 3 student in class. And I really saw that as the way to get out of our position. I saw that as a ticket to a good university. I saw that then as a ticket to a good job as a ticket to better stability, and so on and so forth. So ambition is one thing, but I also think that you have to have a confluence of not just your circumstance and competence and your drive and ability, but you also need catalysts in your life.
Right.
And those catalysts can come from all kinds of sources. So for me, there were 2 or 3 very important catalysts in life. The first was we actually immigrated to Canada. So Canada was a big catalyst for me. I moved to Canada when I was 14 years old, again with the support of our extended family and friends. Why was Canada a catalyst? Because for the first time as a teenager, I saw the power of good infrastructure and good public schooling. Whereas in the East, we're used to sort of the best schools being private schools, and you could afford it or you couldn't afford it. In Canada, the public schooling system was amazing. And I had the opportunity of a lifetime through that system to study the International Baccalaureate Diploma, which I could never have dreamt of doing if I had been in the circumstances I previously was in, because it would have been expensive. The financial barrier would have been very, very high, no matter how good you were at school. So Canada was a huge catalyst for me because it allowed me to get an education that was extremely broad. Canada was also another catalyst for me because it opened my eyes to the world of Ivy League universities in North America. In the US, a lot of Ivy League universities, not all, but at least some of them, offer something called a needs-blind admissions process, which meant that you could apply based on your merit. And if you got in based on your merit, they would assess your financial circumstances and allow you to bridge the gap. So this wasn't a loan. This wasn't you having to, apply to 10, 15 different scholarships and try to piece together the funds that you needed.
Right.
It's a system that truly recognized people who brought potential to the table but didn't have the means, and allowed them to bridge that gap. And to me, that was a real catalyst for a family that had set up an endowment somewhere for people like me to come and benefit from a 4-year sort of dual degree program at the University of Pennsylvania, which was not even something I had dreamt I could do. So Wharton was a big catalyst for me. The International Baccalaureate program was a catalyst for me. The Canadian experience was a catalyst for me. But the biggest catalyst amongst all of this is actually the people that mentored me at various stages of this journey. I have a lot of family members who have been great inspirations to me, including my mother, because I think she demonstrated resilience through her day-to-day actions before resilience became such a big buzzword that it is today. And so for me, resilience was a very lived experience. It wasn't something I read in textbooks. I could see it every single day. And that kind of influence was great. But there were other catalysts too, notably one of my uncles who, when I was a teenager and I was starting to show ambition and wanting to go do things but didn't know how to sort of navigate this path, my uncle, who is actually a father figure to me today, really helped me navigate that, helped me make connections with people, taught me what it is like to approach somebody cold and have a conversation with them, get to know what they do, what is their life like, what was their career like. I still remember one of the first tasks he encouraged me to do was go and talk to people from 5 different walks of life and understand, how they got to where they got to, and what does it mean to get from point A to point B to point C, things like that, which I didn't really have a structure for before. And I did that. I spoke to doctors, I spoke to engineers, I spoke to finance professionals. And what it allowed me to do was figure out, okay, I'm here today and I want to get there. What are the things I need to do? That's really critical, and mentors help you achieve those kinds of things.
So would you say that he's your mentor in some ways?
I think he's my mentor, my inspiration, everything, my rock. It's a huge role he's played in my life because I never thought I could do the things I did. I knew I wanted to get financially secure and stable and things like that. I didn't have a path and I didn't have a plan for it. And what he did was he believed in the potential and he nurtured that potential and gave me a path towards that success. So when I applied to Wharton, the essays that I was writing and the level of scrutiny that a Wharton essay or any Ivy League essay needs to get through that admissions process is extremely high. So I had a lot of guidance and advice on how to get your writing to a standard that was on par with people applying for Ivy Leagues? How do you study for something like the SAT and make sure you're getting the right levels that you need? And then once you're at a university like an Ivy League, where you're not the only person who's top of your class, everybody is top of their class.
Exactly.
So how do you then get to a stage where you're continuously pushing yourself to excel, pushing your boundaries, pushing your limits more, and getting comfortable with constantly being uncomfortable? That's what mentors give you. They believe in you, they show you a path, and then they get you to a stage where you're actually thriving in this level of discomfort. And that's the stage that one has to get into to really create something in this world. And you probably know this from your own experience as an entrepreneur, right? It's risky business. It's putting yourself out there. It's being vulnerable in the face of criticism. It's being vulnerable in the face of competition. And it's one thing to do that in the confines of school, but it's a whole other thing to operate at that level when you're surrounded by stars at an Ivy League school, when you're surrounded by professors who, you read in the Wall Street Journal, you read their work in the Wall Street Journal. That's the level at which people operate. So I think mentors played a huge role. All the other catalysts I've mentioned played a huge role. Wharton was a game changer because it taught you what that difference was. It's the delta. It's, what level do you need to be operating at to be cutting it there? And that's not something you can learn in a textbook. That you can only learn that by continually living it, failing many times, but it's through those failures that it really becomes a part of your discipline, that you never accept anything lower than the standard that is set there.
That was so inspiring. Just to continue on the mentors part. So you said that your biggest mentor has been your uncle. But apart from him, so that's from your personal life. Now, professional life, have you had any mentors? And where did you find them and how did you find them?
You can't just have one mentor for your whole life. I really don't think that's practical. And I don't think that that's even possible to do because, two people's lives always weave in and out. Through my professional and my personal journey, I've had a lot of different mentors. Some ex-managers have become mentors. Sometimes friends have become mentors. Friends who sort of follow along on your path for a few years and then decide to take a sidestep somewhere else or go do something else, and the experiences they gain from it. One of my best friends is today a huge mentor to me because she does something completely different to what we used to do together. And she knows me as a person, she knows me as an individual, she knows me as a professional, who's doing something completely different in another country altogether. So you can find mentors even in peers because it's not age and it's not just a gap of a few years of experience that determines what a mentor is. It's their ability to see you for who you are and see that you are capable of getting to some other place, and how do you bridge that. A lot of my managers have taken huge punts on me in many organizations that I've worked in or interned at. They take a chance on you because they see something in you. And those relationships are ones that can become mentorship relationships as well. So how do you find a mentor? I think you have to first be very self-aware about what you're feeling in the moment when you're approaching a job or a task or whatever. Sometimes it's insecurities. Sometimes it's a technical gap. Sometimes it's branding. Sometimes it's about how you present yourself. That's a gap. So it's not technical, it's more of a soft skill. You have to be aware of what your gaps are. And those gaps will change. Early in one's career, it's probably technical. Early in one's schooling life, it's probably the ability to write well, the ability to learn well. Then you move on to sort of a mid-level stage in your career where it's not necessarily just about what you know, but it's about how you lead people and how you bring people along, how you display your consistent message and your brand as a professional as well. And so mentors change through the course of your life. And you have to be open-minded to having that chat with an individual who you admire or you aspire to be, and letting them know that for the next 6 months, this is what I want to work on and I'd like your help on X, Y, Z. So I've had mentoring relationships with people that have lasted only 6 months. I've had mentoring relationships with people that have lasted 2 years. I have other mentors like my uncle who I mentioned, who's so versatile that I can dip in and out of that relationship for all kinds of things. And that's rare, that's very rare. I think it's just about being open-minded to seeking help. No man is an island, right? We weren't born with a chip in our brains on how to do, for example, investment analysis. We learned. Somebody taught somebody and developed methods, and we all learned. Why should soft skills and career management be any different? It's also a path that you're learning. You know, it's a skill set that you're learning. And so I think you have to be open-minded to knowing what your gaps are, finding the right people that can plug in, and stepping away from that mentoring relationship as well when the job's done. Nobody will take offense at it, but you got to have that sort of adult conversation about it. Mentors have an incredible power to tap into your potential. And it is luck sometimes for the mentor and the mentee to meet one another at the right time and for things to align. But it's also willingness. You meet a lot of people in many walks of life, and they all have something to offer. It's about whether we see that and we recognize whether that's something that you could gain from, and to be open to that guidance and advice. One of my mentors, she's actually an artist. She's a professional musician and she works in the field of art, completely different to finance. But what I gained from that mentoring relationship with her, which started as a friendship but has sort of evolved, is the fact that she believes in me when I don't believe in myself. And this case, she's allowed me to see the side of life that is not as pacey and not as, fast as the finance world is. And to your point about when do you need it, is it too late to find a mentor? I don't think it's too late at all. I think we all go through an evolution in terms of what we need. So at this stage in my life, what I need is very different from what I needed 10 years ago. And 10 years prior, when I was still in school and applying to universities, what I needed was very different to what a mentor would be offering me today. And I think we just have to be very honest with ourselves about what those gaps are. And how do you know what those gaps are? You know that by asking for feedback, right? You've got to constantly ask people to tell you what they think and be open and receptive to it. Not to sort of feel like it's a criticism. There's something missing in you, but to recognize that everybody has room for improvement. And maybe a more positive way to think of it is not that it's a room for improvement, it's just an untapped potential. That's what the mentor does, they tap it.
Yeah, interesting. Now changing gears a little bit. So a lot of people your age probably think that doing a startup is the best way to have a fulfilling career. Now you are clearly very different from most of them, right? So can you elaborate on why you believe that one can have a fulfilling career and be impactful even in a corporate job?
I don't run a business, but I don't think that has stopped me from making a difference. The first difference is, of course, to my own family, and I think that's really important. The next level of difference comes with colleagues and peers that I work with. And the difference beyond that comes from more proactive, relationships that I would develop with people that I don't even know, mentees, other organizations. And then, of course, as you get more and more experience, all this fantastic training that you're getting through the corporate world or through any environment that is a bit more structured than a startup environment, whether that's a VC, an investment fund, an investment bank, a commercial bank, what have you. All of that is fantastic experience. It's real world experience, which say you retire at the age of 60, 65 and you want to have a larger impact, you want to set up your own fund or be on a board of directors or things like that. This is experience and this is what is valuable. So I don't think that people should view it as a choice between do I want to have impact or do I want to have a job. That's not the choice. The choice you really need to make is what makes you thrive. Do the things that make you thrive so that you can have a job, you can pay the bills, and you can have impact. And you can enjoy what you do. You've got to solve for multiple outcomes. You can't just solve for one outcome.
Very well said. That's amazing. Yes, I completely agree with you. Know yourself and identify your strengths and weaknesses. Know where you thrive. And from there on, work backwards. I have a question now. I'm sure, you've done a lot of things right, but there must have been so many mistakes in the past, right? So if you were to live your life once again, what would you do differently? So it's almost like saying, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think 2020 has given us a lot of time to think about these very deep questions, I think the first thing I would do differently is it's a very boring thing, but I think it's really important. The first sort of piece of advice I give to my mentees, or even I wish somebody had given me this advice much, much, much earlier in my life, was the first time you earn a paycheck, The first time you make some money, go see a financial advisor. It's important to manage your money well. And that is a skill that we are not taught in schools. We are not taught how to manage personal finances. I think it's really important for the younger generation to make this an active part of their professional lives. It forces you to think about the type of life you want to live. It forces you to think about saving versus consumption. It forces you to think about short-term gain versus long-term gain. So what trade-offs are you willing to make? It forces you to think about what types of companies and investments will you support? Will you support carbon neutral companies, or will you support anything on the S&P? It forces you to deal with not only taking your own personal finances into and having some agency over it, but it also forces you to reckon with some monumental shifts that are happening around the world. And so I think financial literacy is something that I wish I had dabbled with or learned a bit sooner than I had. I think the second thing is something that I wish I had done, more of a regret, and I'm trying to make up for this these days, is play a sport, a team sport. I was always the nerd. I was always the book smart type of person. That's just who I was naturally. And because I was good at it, I sort of stuck to it, you know? I was terrible with any ball game. And because I was so bad at it, I always shied away from playing any sport. And I really wish I had overcome that sooner in life. Because I think, you know, sports teaches you some excellent analogies that apply to interpersonal relationships. Yeah. It applies to mentor-mentee relationships as well. It teaches you how to strategize. It teaches you how to deal with failure. And the sooner you learn to deal with failure, the better. So for me, you know, even when I watch sports today, I'm very fascinated by how sports personalities deal with an off day, or how they deal with being a star on a team that perhaps isn't doing very, very well, or vice versa, or how you can be a captain of a team, not necessarily be the best player on the team, but you can still be the most effective captain for that team. And I think these are so real. They apply in the family, they apply at work, they apply in voluntary organizations you might sit on. They will apply to boards that you will sit on as a board of director as well. And so these are so critical life lessons that I wish I had learned sooner through sport or something like that. So it's a big regret of mine. It also, I think, teaches you to temper your competitiveness, because in sport, you have to be competitive, yes, but there are times when you just have to deal with the fact that you're not the best person on the team, or you're not the best person in a tournament. You just have to deal with that sense of not being number one, which, you know, is difficult for people to do when they're used to being really good. I think the final thing is, either culturally or because I was academic and so on and so forth, I always used to operate under the assumption that if I did a really good job at whatever I was doing, that would be enough, because the quality of my work would speak for itself. But what I have been very late in recognizing is the importance of networking and building your brand. And this is really important in any walk of life. You know, we see this brand management as a theme more and more in the corporate environment. We see that more and more when we're putting resumes together, for instance, and, you know, advice that we give to young graduates and things like that, in terms of what do you want to be known for? What do you want people to associate you with? Not just being good at conducting financial analysis, but what are the character traits that somebody associates with you, you know? So when they think Sneha, do they just think of, you know, she's the bright one? Or do they think of she's the bright one and she's capable of transforming a team, and she's also capable of being empathetic, and she's also capable of building, you know, a diverse set of members around her? What do people associate with you? That's really, really important. And that's what your brand is, you know? And I think for me, growing up, particularly from a more sort of academically oriented cultural context, and then going into a place like Wharton, which also was very academically oriented, very high stakes kind of competitive environment, everybody worked so hard that we all sort of thought that it was the work alone that would make a difference. Don't get me wrong, there's no point in having a brand without the meat behind it. But you have to get into the habit of thinking about what your brand says about you. You know, what does Kate Tekin, you know, represent amongst her peer group? What does algorithm research as a company? What is the brand of the company? So similarly, if you're managing your own career, what's the Sneha Manohar PLC brand? You know, that's something that I've only recently started to think about more. And I think that a lot of that goes back to something I said earlier, which is as you age, you start to realize what those pivotal moments in your life were that defined you. But I think for me, the next stage of my growth has to come from my being able to articulate and to leave an impact in such a manner that when people think of Sneha, they should be able to think of X, Y, and Z, not just X. The world is not going to be a world of specialists and experts for most of us that are growing up in today's environment. I mean, the half-life of skills today is so short, and any technical skill we learn is going to get replaced by an algorithm. So for me, it's about constantly reevaluating what you're good at, what do you want to be known for, what are the hard skills you're good at, what are the soft skills as well that you're good at, and what does that combined package look like? You know, we shouldn't shy away from the word brand management. You know, we are cautioned to put your head down, work hard,
Right.
do your best, all of which is good advice, sound advice. You should be doing your best. But in addition, doing your best is not good enough. That's the point. A quote from Seth Godin, one of the things that he said, which really resonates with me, is good enough isn't good enough anymore. So you really have to not just be just about good. You've got to be constantly pushing boundaries. Boundaries are constantly enlarging as well.